The stray cat kept scratching the wall. Then a stranger smashed the wall and screamed. Can a stray cat's strange obsession reveal a life or death secret hidden behind a neighbor's wall? When a frantic feline's relentless scratching drives one man to take desperate measures, the shocking truth he smashes through to find isn't just one life hanging in the balance, but two, connected in a way no one could imagine. Subscribe, like, and listen now to the incredible story of Sunny, the keeper of the wall. Thump, scratch, thump, scratch, thump, scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound vibrated through the wall, insidious, relentless. Mark Riley pressed the heels of his hands against his temples, trying to focus on the quarterly report glowing on his monitor. It was useless. For nearly 36 hours, the noise had been his unwelcome companion, gnawing at the edges of his concentration, fraying his already taxed nerves. It came from next door, from Mrs. Gable's quiet brick bungalow, specifically from the wall adjoining his driveway. At first he dismissed it. A mouse, a squirrel that somehow got into the attic, annoying but manageable. But this wasn't the sporadic scuttling of rodents. This was rhythmic, persistent, almost deliberate. Thump, scratch, thump, scratch. It had started sometime late Tuesday, faded overnight, then resumed Wednesday morning with infuriating regularity, continuing all day and now well into Thursday morning. He pushed back his chair, the scraping sound loud in the quiet house. Enough was enough. He stalked to the side door, yanking it open. Ready to investigate, maybe yell at whatever creature was causing the racket, he stepped onto his driveway. The sound was clearer, sharper. Not inside his wall, but against the outside of Mrs. Gable's brickwork, near the foundation, where a dense cluster of overgrown alis pressed against the house. And then he saw the source. An orange cat. Not just any cat, but the semi-feral tabby with green eyes that haunted the neighborhood. The one old Mrs. Gable sometimes fed. Mark privately thought of her as a nuisance, always darting away, occasionally, raiding the trash cans if lids weren't secured. Now she was anything but elusive. She was pressed against the brickwork, claws extended, rhythmically scraping and digging at the mortar between the bricks, occasionally thumping her head or body against the wall in frantic bursts. Her focus was absolute, intense, directed at one specific low spot, almost hidden by the bushes. "Hey, get out of here!" Mark yelled, clapping his hand sharply. The cat, Sunny, as Mrs. Gable apparently called her, startled, hissed, and darted back a few feet but didn't flee entirely. She watched him, ears flattened, tail twitching nervously. The moment Mark stopped moving toward her, she crept back to the exact same spot and resumed her relentless assault on the wall. Scratch, scratch, thump. Mark swore under his breath. This was insane. He took another step forward, yelling again. Sunny darted away, vanishing into the deeper shadows of Mrs. Gable's backyard. Mark waited, breathing heavily, listening. Silence. Finally, he turned to go back inside, muttering about stupid strays. But before he even reached his door, he heard it again. Fainter now, but unmistakable. Scratch, 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 thump. She was back at the exact same spot. A prickle of something other than annoyance, something closer to unease, touched Mark's spine. Why was she so fixated on that single point? What the hell was going on behind Mrs. Gable's wall? Mark Riley, 36, worked remotely as a software engineer. A job that demanded focus and quiet, two things increasingly scarce in his life since moving back to his hometown of Oakwood, Illinois. 6 months ago, he'd come back to be closer to his aging parents after a decade away in the fast-paced tech world of Seattle. He'd bought this modest ranch house next door to Evelyn Gable partly because it was affordable, partly because the neighborhood seemed peaceful. Mostly, it was peaceful. His days usually followed a predictable pattern. Early morning run, coffee, long hours coding, microwave dinners, maybe a streaming binge before bed. He was stressed, often working long hours to meet deadlines for a demanding client, and didn't have much bandwidth for neighborly interactions beyond a polite wave. Evelyn Gable, or Mrs. Gable as everyone called her, was 84, a widow for nearly 20 years. She'd lived in her tidy brick bungalow since the 1960s. She was a neighborhood fixture, known for her immaculate roses, her quiet kindness, and her soft spot for stray animals. Mark knew she lived alone. Her children were scattered across the country. He saw her occasionally puttering in her garden or waving from her porch. She'd brought him cookies when he first moved in, a gesture that touched him, but also made him feel slightly awkward, unused to such open friendliness. He knew she fed the strays, including the weary orange tabby. He'd seen the cat, Sunny, waiting patiently on Mrs. Gable's back step some evenings. Sunny was a true stray, skittish, thin, always seemingly on high alert, a survivor navigating the suburban landscape. Mark generally found her presence, and Mrs. Gable's feeding habit, slightly irritating, worrying vaguely about fleas or catfights in the middle of the night. The spot Sunny was so obsessed with was near the foundation, partially hidden by glass. Mark vaguely recalled seeing a loose vent cover near there months ago, when he'd helped Mrs. Gable retrieve a wind-blown gardening hat. It led into the crawl space under the house, he presumed. Perfect entry for mice, or perhaps something smaller. The inciting incident wasn't a single dramatic event, but a dawning realization, coupled with the cat's baffling persistence. As Thursday morning wore on, the scratching continued, an abrasive soundtrack to Mark's mounting anxiety. He tried calling Mrs. Gable's landline. It rang and rang, then went to a generic voicemail. He walked around to her front porch. The morning newspaper lay uncollected. A small pile of mail was visible through the slot. These weren't definitive signs of trouble. She could be away, or simply sleeping late. But combined with the cat's bizarre targeted frenzy, they felt wrong. He remembered Mrs. Gable mentioning her weekly library volunteering day was Wednesday. She hadn't gone. He hadn't seen her take out her trash bins Tuesday night either. Small deviations from routine, easily missed, but now they clicked into place alongside the relentless scratch, thump. Sunny wasn't just being a nuisance. Mark looked out the window again. The cat was still there, digging frantically at the mortar, pausing only to let out sharp, demanding meows. His focus shifted. This wasn't just about the noise anymore. This was about Mrs. Gable. The cat knew something. He had to find out what. His initial goal, silence the annoying cat, transformed into a more urgent one. Check on Mrs. Gable and figure out why Sunny was acting possessed. Mark's first instinct was caution. He wasn't about to break down his elderly neighbors, do it or based on a stray cat's weird behavior. He needed to be rational, follow procedure. He walked back over to Mrs. Gable's house, this time trying the back door. Locked. He peered through the kitchen window above the sink. A couple of dishes sat neatly in the drying rack, the counter tidy. Nothing seemed amiss from that angle. He moved along the side of the house, trying to see into the living room windows, but the blinds were mostly drawn. All quiet, eerily quiet, except for the cat. Sunny was still glued to her spot by the Elis, her paws dusty, her meow growing more frantic. Mark approached her slowly. "Okay, Sunny, what is it?" he murmured, trying to sound calm. "What's got you so worked up?" The cat paused her scratching, looked up at him with wide, desperate green eyes, let out a piercing yowl, then immediately went back to clawing at the bricks. She wasn't just scratching now. She seemed to be trying to dig her way through the solid wall. Mark felt a surge of frustration mixed with growing fear. He pulled out his phone again. Maybe another neighbor would know something. He remembered seeing Mrs. Gable chatting occasionally with Mr. Henderson across the street. Henderson was retired, always seemed to be watching the neighborhood coming and going. Mark walked across the street. "Mr. Henderson," Mark called, out as the older man collected his mail. "Have you seen Mrs. Gable in the last day or two?" Henderson squinted at him. "Evelyn, can't say I have. Why?" "Well," Mark hesitated, feeling foolish. "It's just her paper and mail are piling up, and her cat." He gestured vaguely. "Well, a cat. That orange stray she feeds. It's been scratching nonstop at the side of her house since Tuesday night, acting really strange." Henderson chuckled dismissively. "That cat probably just chasing a mouse in the wall. Or maybe Evelyn finally went to visit her sister in Florida like she talked about. Wouldn't worry about it, son. She's entitled to a trip. He waved a hand and went back inside. Clearly concerned, Mark stood on the sidewalk feeling deflated but also annoyed. Henderson's easy dismissal didn't sit right. Mrs. Gable was meticulous about stopping her paper and mail when she traveled. And the cat, it wasn't just random scratching, it was targeted. Desperate, he walked back towards Mrs. Gable's house, Sonny's cry seeming to follow him. He tried logic again. What could be behind that specific spot? Plumbing? Electrical? Could the cat sense a leak? A short? He walked around the house again, searching for any signs of trouble. Open windows, unusual smells? Nothing. Just the tidy, silent house and the frantic orange cat clawing at the wall. He decided to try distracting Sonny properly. He went home, opened a can of tuna, the smell potent, and placed it on the grass, a good 10 feet away from the scratching spot. He called to Sonny gently. The cat paused, looked toward the tuna, sniffed the air, then completely ignored it and went back to her frantic digging, letting out a heartbreaking series of meows. Okay, this wasn't normal behavior, not even for a stray. Ignoring high value, food for a patch of brick wall, Mark's unease solidified into genuine alarm. The cat wasn't crazy. She was trying to communicate something vital. Whatever was behind that wall, Sonny desperately needed to get to it, or get something out. And given the lack of response from Mrs. Gable, Mark's fear shifted toward the horrifying possibility that she was what Sonny was trying to reach. He paced his driveway, mind racing. What were his options? Calling 911 seemed extreme, based only on uncollected mail and a weird cat. They'd think he was nuts. But doing nothing felt increasingly wrong. He thought about Mrs. Gable's kindness, her cheerful waves, the cookies. He thought about the sheer desperation in Sonny's actions. He owed it to Mrs. Gable. And maybe, even to this persistent, annoying cat, to take this seriously. He looked at the wall, then at his garage. An idea, drastic and potentially problematic, began to form. But first, one more attempt at the official route. Mark pulled out his phone and dialed the Oakwood Police Department's non-emergency number. He explained the situation as calmly and concisely as possible. His elderly neighbor, living alone, hadn't been seen in nearly 2 days. Mail and paper were piling up. No answer at her door or phone. And, feeling slightly foolish as he said it, a stray cat seemed unusually distressed and was obsessively scratching at one specific spot on her foundation wall. The dispatcher was polite, but sounded skeptical about the cat part. She agreed to send an officer for a welfare check, but cautioned that unless there were clear signs of emergency or distress visible from the outside, there wasn't much they could legally do. 20 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. Officer Miller, a woman who looked competent and patient, listened as Mark quickly reiterated his concerns, pointing out the uncollected items and Sonny, who was still stubbornly scratching near the area, pausing only to watch the uniformed officer warily. Officer Miller conducted a thorough check. She knocked loudly on the front and back doors, calling out, "Mrs. Gable? Evelyn, Police Department doing a welfare check. Are you okay?" No response. She checked all the windows and doors. Everything was securely locked. She peered through the windows just as Mark had done, finding nothing obviously amiss inside. She walked over to the spot where Sonny was scratching, observing the cat's focused intensity for a moment. "That is strange behavior," she conceded, shining her flashlight on the brickwork where Sonny had scraped away some of the mortar. "But it's not probable cause to force entry. Could be anything. A nest of rodents in the wall cavity. Maybe she senses a plumbing leak we can't see. Without any sign of forced entry, distress visible through a window, or a prior medical history indicating high risk, my hands are tied." She suggested Mark try contacting Mrs. Gable's relatives if he knew how, or checking with other neighbors again. "Keep an eye out," she advised kindly but firmly. "If anything changes, if you see her through a window and she looks hurt, or hear a cry for help, call 911 immediately. But based on this, we can't break down the door." She got back in her car and drove away. Mark stood there watching the police car disappear, a cold knot of frustration and certainty tightening in his chest. The official channel had failed. Protocol required concrete evidence, and all he had was circumstantial suspicion and a stray cat acting like the world was ending. Henderson was dismissive. The police were bound by procedure. No one else was seeing what he was seeing, or rather hearing what Sunny was trying to tell them. He looked over at Sunny. She hadn't stopped. Scratch, scratch, thump, meow. It was a desperate, unrelenting message. He thought of Mrs. Gable alone in that house. What if she had fallen? What if she was lying hurt just inside that wall, unable to call out, listening to this cat try to save her? What if 2 days had already passed? How much longer could she wait? In that moment, something shifted in Mark. The frustration and helplessness coalesced into a decision. He couldn't wait for concrete proof that might come too late. He couldn't rely on anyone else. He was the one who lived next door, the one who noticed, the one being alerted by this frantic animal. The potential consequences, property damage, angry relatives, even legal trouble, seemed insignificant compared to the possibility of Mrs. Gable lying injured just feet away. He was going in, not through the door but through the wall, right where Sunny told him to. He strode purposefully towards his garage, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. He flicked on the light and scanned the cluttered space, tools, lawn equipment, boxes. He located what he needed, a heavy-duty crowbar and a small sledgehammer. He hefted them, the cold metal solid in his hands. This was crazy, absolutely crazy. But as he walked back out into the daylight towards the silent brick house and the small orange cat relentlessly scraping at the mortar, he felt a grim certainty settle over him. It was the only thing left to do. He had listened to the cat. Now he had to act. Mark took a deep breath and positioned the tip of the crowbar against the mortar joint Sunny had been weakening. He glanced around. The street was quiet. Mr. Henderson's curtains twitched, but the man didn't emerge. Mark ignored it. He swung the sledgehammer, connecting with the head of the crowbar with a sharp crack. A chunk of mortar flew off. Sunny darted back a few feet, startled by the loud noise, but watched him intently, her green eyes wide. He worked. Quickly, methodically, chipping away at the mortar around one of the bricks near the foundation vent Sunny had been focused on. It was slow, hard work. The brick was solid, well set. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the mild spring air. Each strike of the hammer echoed unnervingly in the quiet neighborhood. He managed to loosen one brick, then another, prying them out carefully and setting them on the grass. Behind the brick layer was wood sheathing. This was going to be tougher than he thought. "What in God's name are you doing, Riley?" Mark flinched, turning to see Mr. Henderson standing on the edge of his lawn, arms crossed, face thunderous. "Stay out of this, Walter," Mark grunted, turning back to the wall, and wedging the crowbar behind the sheathing. "That's vandalism. You can't just tear down Evelyn's house. I'm calling the police." Henderson fumed. "Call them," Mark yelled back over his shoulder, putting his weight into the crowbar. "Maybe they can explain why no one checked inside. Something's wrong. I know it." The wood splintered. Sunny, who had crept closer again, let out an encouraging meow. Mark switched to the sledgehammer again, swinging it directly against the weakened sheathing. It splintered further, then broke inwards with a crash, revealing darkness and the fuzzy texture of insulation behind it. Dust filled the air. He coughed, waving it away. Now for the interior wall, likely drywall or plaster. He used the crowbar again, punching it through the insulation and hitting the softer resistance of drywall. He ripped downward, tearing a jagged opening. "Mrs. Gable!" he shouted into the hole. "Evelyn, can you hear me?" Silence. Or was that something? A faint sound like a weak sigh or a rustle, or just insulation settling. Sunny pushed past his legs, trying to peer into the opening, letting out a series of sharp, high-pitched mews directly into her desperation was unmistakable, contagious. Okay, girl, I hear you," Mark muttered, heart racing. He worked faster now, yanking away more drywall, the sound of tearing plaster drowning out Henderson's renewed, protests. The man was clearly on the phone again, likely with the police, but Mark didn't care anymore. He had to know what was behind this wall. He tore away a final large section of drywall. The hole was about 2 feet wide now, dark, deep, and silent. He reached for the heavy-duty flashlight he'd brought from the garage. His hands were trembling slightly. What was waiting on the other side? He braced himself, imagining the worst and hoping for anything better. He aimed the flashlight into the darkness beyond the wall. The beam lit up carpet first, faded with age, probably the den. The light moved upward, revealing an overturned end table, a mess of magazines. And then, dear God, the words ripped from his throat before he could stop them. A raw sound rising and cracking in his chest, blending with Henderson's distant shouting. The flashlight held steady, its beam slicing through the shadows, exposing the terrible truth. Evelyn Gable lay sprawled on the floor just beyond the hole. Her body was twisted at an unnatural angle. One arm stretched out toward the table, her phone just out of reach. Her eyes, open, clouded by pain, were looking toward the light. Toward him. She was alive. Mark's initial scream morphed into a shaky cry of horror and relief. "Mrs. Gable, oh my God, hold on, I'm calling 911. He fumbled for his phone, fingers slick with sweat and grime, and called, trying to explain. Elderly woman, fallen, unresponsive but breathing. I broke through the wall. Hurry. Then another sound, faint, high-pitched, barely audible beneath his own rushed words. It came from inside the wall cavity, near where Mrs. Gable lay. When the call ended, he lowered the flashlight again, angling the beam into the space between the studs. There, nestled on a ledge of insulation, was a tiny orange ball of fur. Kitten, dusty, trembling, eyes blinking in the sudden light. It let out a helpless little cry. From outside, Sonny answered with a deep, urgent meow, inching closer, eyes locked on the kitten. The truth hit Mark like a blow to the chest. Sonny hadn't just been trying to reach Mrs. Gable. She had been trying to rescue her own baby, trapped inside with the fallen woman. Mark slowly reached through the hole. The kitten gave a weak hiss, but it was too scared and small to resist. He gently scooped it up, barely heavier than a breath, and held it against his chest. Sonny stepped forward, collected the kitten, gently in her mouth, and dashed back toward the bushes, her purring rapid and loud. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer by the second. Mark turned back to the hole, leaning in. Help is coming, Mrs. Gable. Just hold on. You're not alone. Her eyes fluttered in response. Moments later, paramedics and police were on the scene, including a surprised Officer Miller. They took control quickly, assessing the situation and enlarging the opening Mark had created to safely extract Mrs. Gable. She was stabilized and rushed to the ambulance. Mark stood back, breath ragged, limbs trembling, dust clinging to his clothes. The image of Evelyn's faded eyes and that tiny kitten would stay with him for a long time. In the aftermath, Mark explained everything, to Officer Miller, to a now quiet and sheepish Mr. Henderson. The scratching, the ignored signs, the cat's persistence, the decision to break through the wall, the discovery of not one life in danger, but two. Officer Miller, seeing the full context, assured him there would be no charges for the damage given the outcome. Mrs. Gable spent several days in the hospital, recovering from dehydration, a fractured hip, and sheer exhaustion. Doctors were clear. Mark's timing had saved her life. A few more hours, they said, and the result could have been tragic. Word of the rescue and Sonny's role spread quickly. Mark, once just the quiet new guy, began receiving waves from neighbors, friendly smiles, thank you notes. Even Henderson offered a gruff apology and help fixing the wall. Mark checked on Sonny and the kitten every day, leaving food and water near the bushes. Sonny stayed cautious, but began to trust him. The kitten, surprisingly tough, stayed close to its mother. When Mrs. Gable returned home, still in recovery and needing daily help, one of her first questions was about the cat. Mark reassured her. Both Sonny and her kitten were safe. Since she couldn't care for them during recovery and with her blessing, Mark made a decision. He coaxed Sunny and her kitten, now called Lucky, into a carrier and brought them into his own home. Life on Oak Street found a new rhythm. Mark's house wasn't so silent anymore. There were paw steps across the floor, playful meows, soft purrs in the background of his days. Sunny never became overly affectionate, but she was always there, usually curled up nearby as he worked. Lucky grew fast, always underfoot, always curious. Mark found peace in the routine, feeding them, cleaning up after them, sharing space with them. Stress that had once clung to him began to fade. His connection to the neighborhood deepened. He visited Mrs. Gable often, brought her groceries, gave her updates on Sunny and Lucky. The wall was patched up, but everyone on Oak Street remembered what had happened, how one stray cat's determination saved 2 lives and knocked down more than brick and plaster. It broke through walls of silence, of habit, of loneliness. It reminded everyone that sometimes when no one listens, it takes a desperate cry and a stubborn cat to finally break through.